So, in this take, I want to talk about a couple of things. One of which is obviously the launch of Jeremy Corbyn's new party, and that's why I'm calling this Your Party or Mine, as they've used a very odd placeholder transitional brand of Your Party. But the other theme, and I thought it was a clever play on words, was actually to explore some of the dynamics around reform at the moment. There is a kind of a growing chorus of criticism on what you might describe as the sort of the online right, which is a kind of broad bracketed term that kind of encapsulates sort of, on one hand, sort of ethno nationalists really out there, but also some of these other more populist Anglo futurist and sort of libertarian technology minded kind of characters on the right, including Dominic Cummings, who all have their sort of various critiques about reform and its lack of preparedness for the future. So I'm going to cover off both in this take. But let's start with Corbyn and Zara Sultana's new venture. So they have finally come forward and sort of soft launched, I should say, the basis for this new political party that they haven't as of yet registered formally with the Electoral Commission, but they're working towards it, they say. And, this is obviously an unconventional soft launch whereby they put up a website called your links to your party dot something or other. I can't remember. But effectively, it's a free sign up to a sort of website where there's a statement of values on what the party will stand for. And it's very much what you would expect from a Corbynite sort of party, or all the usual kind of greatest hits. But interestingly, the funny thing with it was they didn't actually give it a proper name. They called it Your Party. Now, I think there's actually, and this obviously, general hilarity ensued when Zara Sultana kind of popped up herself and said, hang on, that's not the name of the party, when Politics Joe labelled it as it's called Your Party. So they looked shambolic on the surface, no doubt about that. And SW1 and all the politicos on X and elsewhere, we all had a good laugh about it. But I will say this: just cast your mind back to the 2017 general election and remember the similar sort of scenes when the Labour manifesto was initially leaked. And I put leaked inadvisedly in quotation marks there, ahead of its formal launch. What did that lead to? It led to sort of 4 or 5 days of wall to wall coverage of these leaks and of the dynamics around it and what they were promising and how outlandish it seemed. And then, actually, when the actual hard launch came out of the Labour manifesto, they'd already had a lot of free media, a lot of coverage. And I just wonder whether, as much as we all love to mock it and so forth, this Your Party sort of device, it gets people talking about their party weeks, potentially months before it formally launches. So it's not completely mad. I mean, it's a very odd branding kind of framed kind of call it Your Party, and it's a placeholder, and it's not really, because I think we all know what the name is going to end up being, because the website is owned by a limited company under Corbyn and others, called, as far as I understand, called Peace and Justice. And I think Peace and Justice may well end up being what they call the party. But I think it's a clever gambit to sort of, elicit a lot of sustained focus on them. I think it's clever. And of course, they are boasting already about having overtaken reform in terms of sign-ups. They haven't, because they're not actually they're just putting up a free newsletter, basically a sign up to register your interest in the party. And you're not actually joining it because you're not paying a membership subscription. It's totally free. Whereas if you want to join Reform, you either have to pay £25, or if you're under, I think it's under 25, I think you pay £10. So, at the moment, they haven't got a brass nickel to rub together in terms of membership and donations. But do watch this space. They could go places. Obviously, Corbyn has got a natural base on the far left of British politics. There's no shortage of fools happy to part with their money. But for the moment, it's in an embryonic state. But I think it could do some significant damage to the Labour Party if it's organised. And I'm not saying it's going to sweep in and capture lots of seats, but it could cost Labour a whole clutch of seats, and it could actually pick some up. And this kind of speaks to some of Nigel Farage's long-standing concerns, and he was proven right at the 2024 election about that rising potential of sectarianism, in some of the constituencies around the country. So yeah, watch this space on that. I want to kind of move on now to Reform UK, and on something else that I'm definitely noticing a big, increasing kind of trend happening on X is a whole clutch of people sort of chiming in with their view that reform isn't ready for government. If only they'd listen to us, if only they were bold enough to take the kind of steps that all the siren voices would love them to take, and that they're not listening to the right people. I mean, you have Dominic Cummings, who had let's put it this way, he had a mixed track record in government, to say the least. He's there labelling the people in reform. He's calling them either cokeheads or morons. Classic Cummings. And then you've got the kind of the likes of Connor Tomlinson, who I think he's still in his 20s, sort of claiming that it's only thanks to people like him that reform are now sort of surging in the polls, because finally they're speaking the language of the new nationalists online. And it's just total rubbish, because Nigel Farage has had national sovereignty and controlled immigration and strong borders. He's absolutely been the OG character on this since the early 1990s. So there is a lot of claims about ownership, intellectual ownership of the direction of travel of reform. But I want to say I was very encouraged, and I think it's a tweet that was really sort of overlooked, didn't get that much pickup. Typical Westminster lobby didn't really focus in on this, but there was a very big claim earlier in the week from Zia Yusuf, the former chairman of Reform, now head of Doge, Reform Doge UK. And he is also helping out with policy still, very much so in the background. And I would personally like to see him take on a more formalised role in that regard. But we'll see what happens. But what Zia put up the other day, I'm going to read it out to you. I've got it here. So he writes, "People have no idea how much policy work Reform is already doing. We will have thousands of pages of legislation oven ready for when Nigel Farage becomes PM. We know the system, the blob, will activate to block us at every turn. We will be ready. They will be defeated." End of tweet. This was on X, and yeah, I mean, it got a reasonable sort of pickup, about 1,000 reposts, so it wasn't totally ignored, but it didn't quite sort of land to the extent that you might hope that it would, as a sort of source of reassurance. So I think that is a very significant expression of confidence that they are on the right track, and they are. I genuinely know this. I know of people who are having the conversations behind closed doors. I know that things are beginning to pick up. They're not purely relying on a threadbare operation. There are a lot of people pitching in. Now, over at one of my 2X handles, at Daniel Reform UK, I actually have in the pinned post, it's called Upstream Fundamentals. Give that a read. Those are my thoughts on how reform can build a network of institutions, sort of a movement base around its policy agenda over time. And it's got in there ideas around the need for having these oven ready kind of institutions to kind of come in, these teams to come in and take over parts of the public sector leadership, to actually implement, with specialist practitioners. Building all of that, it's going to take time, but it's well worth doing. But yeah, I mean, I just think that with reform, you've got some very talented people coming forward to help the party. We're starting to see things motoring. We saw this earlier this week with the Britain is Lawless campaign. Some really good sound ideas coming out from it. But they know, and he's absolutely right when he speaks to the the wrecking tactics of the senior civil service and the Quangocrats and their allies out in the voluntary and in the private sector to an extent. So, Reform knows what it's going to be up against. This idea that they're sort of lambs to the slaughter who have no idea of how to get anything done. It just doesn't wash. They're going to have a really, really good strategic blueprint ready for government. But critically, they're not going to literally telegraph it all in the Daily Telegraph, which is what certain characters like Douglas Carswell seem to think, that 4 years out from an election, you lay out your entire agenda, every piece of legislation that you would bring through, and give the enemy, the opponent, I should say, time to prepare, further institutional roadblocks, further complications in UK law, further international law commitments that make your job in unpicking it all 10 times harder. The best thing Reform can do is keep as much under its hat as possible when it comes to the detail of the strategy that they're going to undertake, the way that they're going to grab control of a system that has become completely divorced from democracy. That we're meant to have a Westminster model with a strong core executive. That's been hollowed out over decades. So much of the power does not fit with what was traditionally known in the Westminster model as responsible party government. No, we don't have a Westminster model anymore. We have a Westminster muddle, because their powers are no longer as clear. So much gets pulled out into this sort of a morass of quangos, and then you also have judicial review to factor in. And then you kind of, you basically do not have the strong executive that is going to be needed at the moment. And I think Reform is going to look at civil service reform really, really intensively in the coming years and think about what changes they're going to need to make. And I think that they're going to do things that are going to, shake up the system. I think the Bank of England's powers will be revisited. I think the OBR is a Christmas turkey. There's going to be new arrangements put in place. A lot will depend on who kind of comes into the particular shadow cabinet positions. That's the other thing. Reform, is really, not wedded to this idea that everybody in the cabinet, everybody on the front bench must have MP behind their title. Nigel Farage is of that view that the executive and the legislature, to an extent they can overlap, but actually you need to bring in the most talented, most experienced people. And not all of those people want to have a big parliamentary mailbag that they're going through. They just want to get on with what they're there to do in government. They don't want to be an MP. Not everybody lives and breathes for hanging around the Commons bar. So yeah, interesting times. And I would just sort of implore fellow reformers really, to kind of stay steady. Don't get kind of pulled into the direction of fretting that reform isn't serious enough. That only if we go further to the right, if we kind of go down the sort of restore Britain, advance UK kind of route of just being bellicose about everything and pretending everything's really easy to solve. And sort of governing by caps lock on social media, that's going to get you anywhere. And also that setting out your ideas in Substack or in the Telegraph at great length and great detail, that's the way that you kind of win the election. It's not, because the public, they're not that interested in the fine technical detail. They want the headlines, they want the direction of travel, they want confidence that you've got the right ideas and the right talented people, absolutely. But they do not need the fine detail of how you're going to approach civil service recruitment, how permanent secretaries will be appointed and removed under a reform government. That is stuff that you do not need to advertise massively years in advance of an election, if at all. So yeah, those are my thoughts, and I kind of bring it back to all these characters running around on the online right. Why don't you focus on your own parties, on your own social pressure group, whatever you want to call Restore Britain this week? Just leave Reform UK to the reformers. We know what we're doing at the grassroots and at the national level. Reform is going to be all right, and it's going to get into power and change this country for the better. Well, I hope so, at least. Thank you very much.